What if Ash met Meowth first? In The Power of Us. G'day everyone, Rune here. And I really have come to consider the start of AMMF to be when my channel really got started, because that's when I actually started getting subscribers. Which makes me all the more embarrassed that story's beginning quality is what it is, but that's beside the point. So, continuing on from last year's anniversary special, I present unto you this year's anniversary special of What If Ash Met Meowth First in The Power of Us. Now, before we start the story, I just need to say that this movie and its follow-up, Secrets of the Jungle, are so much better than I Choose You. If you want my advice and you want to watch the alternate timeline movies, just skip I Choose You and watch the other two. You're not missing anything. Now, no more delay, let's start the story. We start the story not with Ash, but with a young girl named Risa, getting out of school after a long day. As she is waving goodbye to her friends, she hears the bang of a start gun and looks over to see several girls from her year running along a racetrack. Pursing her lips, she turns away and begins to make her way to the hospital where her little brother Rick is waiting for her. When she arrives at Rick's room, she finds him messing with his laptop as he's been doing ever since he broke his leg. Spotting her, he gives a big smile and greeting as he closes the laptop, leaving whatever he was doing for the time being. Walking up to him, she shows him a bag with a fresh set of clothes, before asking about his leg. Wanting to reassure her, Rick tells her that it's fine as long as he doesn't move it too much, only to immediately bang it on the bed table. Heaving a sigh, Risa tells him that he needs to be more careful. Rick frowns at her slightly as she puts the clean clothes in one of the drawers next to the bed, asking if her leg has healed and if she's running again. Risa frowns at him and tells him to just worry about how his own leg is healing. She then switches the subject and asks him about the essay competition he'd entered before his leg got hurt. Rick's frown deepens into a pout as he tells her that it wasn't an essay competition, it was an application to be trusted with one of the great Professor Oak's Pokemon. Risa holds her hands up in surrender, a small teasing smile on her face before she asks how his application went. Ignoring the teasing tone, Rick grins broadly as he tells her that his application was accepted. Her smile turning into one of pride, she asks him when Oak is going to be sending the Pokemon. Nervously, he scratches the back of his head and says that there may be a few snags. He explains to her that due to prior obligations, Professor Oak can't deliver the Pokemon himself, so he's asked a trainer that he trusts to deliver the Pokemon for him. However, due to extenuating circumstances, the trainer can't come to their town to deliver the Pokemon directly. The original plan was for him to meet up with them halfway in Fula City. It was perfect as the timing matches up with Fula City's Wind Festival, so he'd be able to bond with his new Pokemon during the festival before bringing them back home. But with his leg injured, there's no way he'll be able to go now. Even if their parents let him, which is as likely as a Corviknight befriending a Tinkaton, he'd probably just end up collapsing in the street and need to be carried around by the other trainer, ruining their time at the festival. Seeing where this conversation is going, Risa gives a good-natured sigh. Let me guess, you want me to go and pick up the Pokemon for you. Smiling brightly, Rick thanks her for agreeing to do such a big favor for him. Before she can teasingly say that she never agreed to it, he grabs a small case off of his nightstand and hands it to her. Grinning, he tells her that it's a little thank you for doing this for him. Inside, Risa finds a pair of expensive, high-end sunglasses, bringing a big grin to her face. With that, the siblings bid each other farewell, and Risa begins to make her way home so that she can start packing. It's a long journey to Fula City. Several days later, Ash arrives in Fula City with Meowth and Pikachu. The three are riding the tram, with Ash standing at the door to look out at the city and the locals they pass by, Meowth sitting on one of the seats reading a tourist guide pamphlet about the Wind Festival, and Pikachu climbing all over the tram, unable to keep still in his excitement. He jumps over Meowth, causing him to drop the pamphlet before climbing up the chairs and over the overhead railing. Ash watches as the electric mouse scampers over his head. He's just about to turn onto a joining rail when the tram turns, causing him to lose his balance and fall from the rails. He nearly falls off of the tram when Ash catches him, pulling him close. He looks down at Pikachu with an exasperated smile while Pikachu scratches the back of his head bashfully. I understand that you're excited to meet your new trainer, Pikachu, but you need to be more careful. Soon enough, it comes time for them to get off the tram. Hopping off, the group of 3 begin to make their way through the various stalls that have been set up for the Wind Festival as they begin their search for the Pokemon Research Center. There, Pikachu will get to meet his new trainer. As they walk, they take in the sights and sounds of the city and its celebrations, enjoying the atmosphere of joy and excitement. Some, however, seem to be getting into the excitement of the festival a little too much, as, while passing a park, they see a crowd gathering and hear a man talking very loudly. Curious, Ash stops to see what's going on, and sees a man with blonde hair telling a story about how Fula City had grown thanks to Lugia. Ash has to fight very hard to keep himself from laughing. This guy is a bigger fibber than Gary after getting caught doing something stupid. He may not know much about the history of this town, but he knows for a fact that the fire the man is talking about happened way too long ago for him to have lived through. He should be at least another decade old. Walking away from the crowd, Ash nearly loses his hold on his laughter when Meowth comments that the man is a bigger tattletale than Gary. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Risa walks through the streets. She marvels at how lively the place she'd once believed to be a sleepy little town is. She's so absorbed in her awe she doesn't notice the woman behind her yelling at her son Flora to get away from her before storming away. Back over with Ash, it has been several minutes and there is still no sign of the Pokemon Research Center. With a sigh, he decides it's time to face the facts. He's gotten them lost again. Looking up and down the street, he tries to find some kind of street sign or something, only for his attention to be drawn by the sound of a loud crash. Looking further down the hilly street, he sees a group of 3 boys with a Fairfy and a little red wagon full of lemons. In front of them is a small pink-haired girl who is just picking herself up off of the ground. He can guess from a glance that the girl must have run into the boys and tripped over the wagon. He's just about to go over and see if any of them are hurt when he hears the boys begin to address the girl, Margot, with angry tones. He shares a look with Meowth, who gives a nod before the group begin to run towards the trouble. He's very grateful for the added momentum that comes from running downhill as he sees one of the boys pick up a lemon off the ground. Skidding down the last few feet, he's just in time to catch the lemon as it's thrown at Margot's head. He lightly tosses the lemon in his hand like a ball while he stares the boys down with his best "I am both unimpressed and highly annoyed" look. Such violence, and all over something as minor as a few spilt lemons. You may be kids, but during the festival, you're representatives of your city. Is this really the impression you want to give? A bunch of bullies that attack others over a simple mistake? What would your mothers say? Rather than knocking some sense into the boys, like Ash had hoped, his comments instead make them even angrier. Glaring at him, they ask who he thinks he is to be telling them what to do. The boy with the beanie then directs his Fairfy to use Rollout on Meowth. Rolling his eyes, Ash doesn't even tell Meowth to dodge, knowing that the Scratch Cat will be able to do it easily. He then turns to him and asks if he wants to use Shadow Iron or Dark Thunder. Looking at the Fairfy as it's coming back around, Meowth says that he thinks a combo attack might be a bit overkill for this one. Hearing the Pokemon speak in full human sentences is a complete shock to the children, and the boys in particular are a little frightened about how casually the strange boy and Pokemon are taking this. Completely ignoring the children's reactions, Meowth continues, saying that maybe they should just stick with basic attacks this time. Ash shrugs and says whatever Meowth thinks is best. With that, Meowth dodges the returning Fairfy before activating Iron Tail. Coating his tail in a metal sheen, he swings it at the small Pokemon, sending it flying into the boy that had told it to attack them. The Fairfy slams into the boy's chest, knocking him over while Fairfy is completely knocked out. Frowning at the boys with his arms crossed, Ash asks them if they still feel like fighting, or do they only want to pick on people that can't fight back? Realizing that they're out of their league, the boys make a hasty retreat. Watching them go with a huff, Ash comments that bullies always run when they can't win a fight easily. He then turns to Margot, asking if she's okay. Smiling, she tells him that she's fine, before thanking him and Meowth for coming to her rescue. Smiling back, Ash asks if she knows where the Pokemon Research Center is, as he seems to have gotten his group lost. Happy to repay the kindness that they showed her, Margot begins to lead them towards the main road. Behind a bush, Jessie, James, and Porygon watch as they go. They know that Ash and Meowth had faced off against Ho-Oh alongside one of his friends some time ago, and had come out relatively unscathed. But the display of analytics, restraint, and obvious power hidden just beneath the surface is still terrifying and awe-inspiring in equal amounts. As much as they'd love to try capturing Meowth, or better yet, get the Raven to join Team Rocket, they know that the odds of that are low. Even lower than their funds. After the mess that had happened in Viridian Forest, the organization had needed to undergo some budget cuts. So their team is more than a little strapped for cash, and any big plans are going to need to be put on the back burner. Though, seeing those boys had given Jessie an idea of how to fix that little problem of theirs. If they open up their own juice stand, they'll be able to rack in a massive amount of money. After all, success is the right product at the right time. Meanwhile, Margot has led Ash, Meowth, and Pikachu back to the main road, where they're able to see the eternal flame in the distance. Margot, who has just spent the last few minutes telling Ash and the Pokemon about the festival, points it out to them and explains its significance, being a homing beacon for Lugia. Nodding in understanding, Ash spots an odd structure behind the massive tower at the top of a large mountain. Pointing to it, he asks Margot if she knows what it is, and she explains that it was, supposedly, a power plant that hasn't been used in years. According to her father, the forest around the plant caught fire, resulting in the plant being damaged beyond repair. She's also heard that Lugia summoned the rain in order to stop the blaze. Hearing this, Ash can't help but laugh and comment that summoning the rain seems to be Lugia's favourite hobby. Giving a giggle, Margot points down the road, telling Ash that if he follows it, he'll find the Pokemon Research Center in no time. Thanking Margot for her help, the trio part ways with her, heading towards the center while Margot begins to make her way towards the forest. Meanwhile, back over with Risa, she's currently walking through the festival grounds with her head buried in a map. She is meant to meet Professor Oak's representative at the Pokemon Research Center, but she can't find it. And the map certainly isn't helping. She's broken from her thoughts as she feels something run into her, causing her to fall over and lose her grip on her map. Sitting up on her heels, she looks behind her to see a girl with purple hair carrying a Clefairy doll. Behind her is a tall woman with dark purple hair cut in a pixie cut and a man wearing brightly coloured clothes. The little girl, Kelly, apologizes for knocking her over while her Uncle Callahan checks Kelly for injuries. Risa smiles at the small family and says that she wasn't looking where she was going before turning to pick up her map, only for it to be blown away by Fula's wind. Witnessing this, Kelly asks if Risa is lost. Giving an embarrassed smile, Risa explains that she's supposed to be meeting someone at the Pokemon Research Center, but she hasn't been able to find it. Smiling happily, Kelly tells her that she can just ask her Uncle Callahan. He used to live in Fula, so he'll certainly know where the center is. Risa smiles excitedly and her eyes shine hopefully as she turns to Callahan, asking if he really knows where the center is. Callahan smiles nervously as he asks her to give him a moment to consult his mental map. After a moment he shouts, "I got it!" before pointing her towards town. He tells her that the research center is a big, old-looking building with an inflatable Lugia out the front. If she walks in the direction of the park, she's sure to spot it. Excitedly, Risa pats him on the back, thanking him for his help before running off, not wanting to keep Professor Oak's rep waiting for too long. Meanwhile, behind her, Callahan lets out a subtle, relieved sigh. Back over with Ash, he'd finally managed to arrive at the Pokemon Research Center 20 minutes ago, relieved that he'd managed to arrive on time. Now, however, he's beginning to worry about the trainer that is meant to be coming to get Pikachu. He hopes that nothing has happened to them. As Ash, Meowth, and Pikachu wait, they spot a man with green hair and wearing a lab coat drop a bunch of papers. Without a moment of hesitation, the three rush over to help him gather up the dropped papers before they can get blown away in the wind. The man startles at their sudden arrival before frantically stuttering out that they don't need to help pick all of this up. Ash smiles back at him reassuringly, telling the man that they want to help. Besides, the wind is picking up and these papers look important. It'd be really bad if any of them got blown away. The man looks at the ground and gives a minute nod before telling Ash in a voice barely above a whisper that his name is Tauren. Smiling, Ash introduces himself before standing up with an armful of pages, Meowth and Pikachu following suit with their own arms also full. Taking his cue, Tauren also stands up before leading Ash and the Pokemon into the center into a small area at the back, blocked off by a plane of glass. Once inside, they drop the papers on a nearby table. With a small smile, Tauren thanks them for their help. It's at that moment that a tall man with puffy brown hair walks in, asking Tauren when their guest speaker is going to be arriving. Instantly, Tauren's shoulders tense and his whole body begins to tremble from anxiety. In a trembling voice, he tells the older man, whom he addresses as Director, that the speaker cancelled earlier that day. Shocked and panicked, the Director begins to ask Tauren what they're going to do now. Not willing to stand by and watch this, Ash steps in, telling the man not to blame Tauren for this. It's not his fault that the speaker decided to cancel so last minute. The Director takes a deep breath, calming himself down before telling Ash that he knows it's not Tauren's fault. That's not what he's saying. He's just worried that they won't be able to find a replacement on such short notice. Ash, being Ash, instantly offers to speak for them. The Director gives him a grateful smile but shakes his head. It's nice of Ash to offer, but he's sadly a little too young to be a guest speaker. All of the officials that are going to be in attendance are a bit stuffy and traditional and won't listen to anyone younger than 20. It's at this point that Tauren jumps back into the conversation, asking if Ash hadn't been waiting for someone earlier and pointing out a young girl now standing outside of the building looking a little panicked. Thinking that this must be the new trainer that he'd been waiting for, Ash bids Tauren and the Director goodbye and good luck before rushing out to greet the girl, passing by an elderly woman on the way. Risa paces back and forth in front of the Pokemon Research Center. She can't see the representative anywhere. Did they get sick of waiting and leave? This is all that lying jerk's fault. He should have just said he didn't know where the research center is, rather than sending her on a wild swanna chase to a museum. If it hadn't been for Granny Harriet taking pity on her and showing her the way, she would have been stuck wandering the city all day. But even though she's found the place now, it might not even matter. Excuse us, are you Risa? Nearly jumping out of her skin from surprise, Risa spins around to face a boy that looks to be a few years younger than her. On his head sits a Pikachu, and by his side stands a Meowth. A slight shake in her voice due to the surprise, she tells him yes. He scratches the back of his head, apologizing for startling her, and introduces himself as Ash, explaining that he was asked by Professor Oak to meet her here. Risa's eyes light up with joy and relief as she asks if that means that he's the representative that her brother told her was going to be bringing the professor's Pokemon. Giving a chuckle, Ash confirms, before plucking Pikachu off of his head and holding him out to Risa. Risa accepts the little yellow mouse Pokemon happily as Ash introduces them, holding him gently in her arms. Smiling down at him, she introduces herself and expresses her hope that they can be friends. She turns back to Ash as he begins to dig in his bag, telling Risa that there is one thing that she needs to absolutely keep in mind when it comes to Pikachu. Finding what he's looking for, he pulls out a Pokeball with a lightning bolt sticker on it. He holds it out to Risa while telling her that Pikachu doesn't like being in his Pokeball, so she should keep the ball somewhere safe, like her bag. Nodding in understanding, Risa takes the ball before putting it at the bottom of her bag to make sure it doesn't fall out. Once that's done, Ash tells her that he's glad she was able to find her way here. He was worried that she'd gotten lost, something he is all too familiar with. Risa apologizes for keeping him waiting, explaining the whole situation with getting directed towards a museum before Granny Harriet had noticed her distress and offered to take her to the center. She also apologizes that her brother can't be there to meet them himself and accept Pikachu in person. Ash waves off the apology, saying that he understands, but is a bit confused. Why would... Before he can finish his question, Risa gives a shout of surprise as she spots something behind him. Turning to look behind him, he spots a small family of 3. Beside him, Risa explains that the man in the group is the one that gave her dodgy directions. She moves to storm over to them, but stops as Ash places a hand on her shoulder. In a calm tone, he tells her that there's a better way to handle the situation than storming over and shouting at him in front of his family. He suggests that they exercise a little tact for this, before taking the lead and leading them over to the group at a leisurely stroll. The first to spot them coming is the little girl who instantly recognizes Risa, pointing her out to her Uncle Callahan. The man in question looks at the two approaching children nervously, while the girl's mother smiles at them welcomingly. The little girl, who the woman addresses as Kelly, smiles up at the two older kids, saying how glad she is that they were able to meet up. Ash smiles back in a way that reminds Risa of her dad. Kneeling down, he tells Kelly that it wasn't easy as he and his Pokemon had gotten lost on the way, so they'd almost ended up missing each other. Smiling cheerfully, Kelly says that maybe he should have gotten directions from her uncle too. Still smiling, Ash stands up, turning to Callahan. Politely, he asks if it would be alright for them to have a quick word with him. Quickly looking between the two girls with him, he shakily agrees, while telling Kelly and her mother Mia that he'll catch up. Once the girls are a far enough distance away, Ash gestures for them to move into a little shaded spot behind the research center. Once they're there, he nods to Risa, giving her the go-ahead. Not needing to be told twice, Risa begins ripping into Callahan for lying to her about knowing where the center is, asking what he would have done if his bad directions had caused her to miss Ash. What if her not showing up had made Pikachu think that his future trainer didn't want him anymore? Once he gets the volume of her voice, Callahan clasps his hands in front of him in a begging gesture. He tells the tweens that he didn't want to disappoint his niece, so he made an educated guess. Ash gives him a look that neither of them can decipher before telling him that, in his experience, things like this always come back to bite people on the butt. And not just the person that lied. One of his best friends told a massive lie to him and his other friends and didn't come clean about it when he had the chance. Instead, they had to learn about it in the worst possible way, and that caused a major disaster that nearly got them all killed. Yeah, telling little white lies are almost to be expected, especially if it's to spare someone's feelings. But lying to make himself look good for his niece is more likely going to hurt them all in the long run. Callahan winces, asking what exactly he should do then. Ash shakes his head before telling him that he can't tell him what to do. It's his family, so he's the one that needs to make that decision. He does suggest, however, that he figures it out soon before someone ends up getting hurt. With that, the tweens depart, allowing Callahan to rejoin his family. Just as he meets up with them, the festival PA system crackles into life, announcing the festival's catchphrase. While Ash turns to Risa with a look that is both confused and disturbed, Kelly excitedly tells her uncle to enter. Not wanting to disappoint her, he tells her that he'll win and give her the trophy. While Kelly celebrates, he scratches the back of his head while breaking out into a cold sweat. But then, a sudden idea hits him. Telling the girls that he just remembered something he forgot to tell Ash and Risa, he rushes back to the Pokemon Center. Meanwhile, Margot is making her way through the forest to a very special place. Smile plastered on her face, she skips past old brick walls and wooden frames that have been covered in the greenery of the forest. The signs of humans almost completely wiped away by the hands of time. At last, she arrives at a building that is in much better condition than the rest of the forgotten structures. For while its roof has massive holes, a giant tree growing out of one of them, the windows long gone, and the walls in much the same state as the roof, it at least retains its overall structure, still resembling the town hall it had once been. Skipping up the last few steps, she reaches into her bag and pulls out a pair of orange berries, a glass of moo moo milk, and a bread roll, placing them carefully on the step in front of her. Hearing a rustle behind her, she turns and smiles at the Teddy Ursa and Ditto behind her. Walking over to a little rock, she pulls out a handkerchief full of biscuits and tells them to dig in, before walking back to the stairs. Standing in front of them, she calls out to the one she knows is hiding inside, apologizing for causing them to be hurt, and telling them that the orange berries will help. When no reply comes, she gives a small, sad smile, telling them that she'll be back soon, before beginning to make her way back to town. A little later, Ash stands in the crowd with Risa and their Pokemon, waiting for the catch race to start. Ash is still more than a little put off by the concept of catching Pokemon for sport, but is a little comforted by Granny Harriet, who'd run into them on the way to the square, explaining that the Pokemon are all released after the race is over. On his shoulder, Meowth sniffs the air slightly before turning to Harriet and complimenting her perfume. On stage, Callahan mutters through his comm device to Tauren, while the Greenette Staryu stands beside him. Tauren nervously asks Callahan to not push his Staryu too hard as it's not used to battling. Telling him not to worry, Callahan gets ready as the announcer begins the countdown. The moment the starting gun fires, he's off as fast as he can. As the contestants run through the city, the audience watches on big screens in the square. Callahan quickly takes the lead, using Staryu's Illuminate ability to his advantage to bring Pokemon in to catch. Watching the proceedings on the screen, Risa comments about how she can't figure out whether to be impressed or not. Her comment is completely missed by Ash, who's staring at a different screen, showing a Tyranitar. She turns to him in confusion as he mutters a quiet, "Oh no." Before she can ask what's wrong, he's running off through the crowd, calling for Meowth to follow. The Scratch Cat follows after him without a second thought, startling Risa and prompting Pikachu to take off after them. Gasping in shock, Risa goes after them, her pace halfway between a fast walk and a jog. Meanwhile, back over with Callahan, he's desperately trying to catch his breath while sweating like crazy and regretting his life choices. Over the comm, Torrent informs him that he's currently in first place by several points. Before he can respond, however, he hears the cry of a Pokemon and turns to see a strange-looking Pokemon trying desperately to conceal itself among a line of trees, while a Golduck is tracking it down. The Golduck finds it easily and begins attacking it with Water Gun. Seeing all of this through the camera installed in the headset Callahan is wearing, Torrent tells him that the Pokemon is Sudowoodo and that it's weak to water attacks. This should be an easy catch for him. Silently, Callahan begins to make his way to the stairs. Back over with Ash and Meowth, they've managed to arrive on a platform right near where Tyranitar is rampaging. He's just about to jump the railing when he hears Risa call out to him from behind. Spinning around, he sees both her and Pikachu rushing up to him. Surprised to see them, he asks what they're doing here. Picking up Pikachu and settling him on her shoulder, Risa huffs, saying that she was about to ask him that. Why did he run off like that, and why towards a massive rampaging Tyranitar? Ash turns back to the railing, looking out to make sure he hasn't lost track of the aforementioned Pokemon. Spotting it further down the path, he explains to Risa that he saw a cord wrapped around Tyranitar's neck. It's not aggressive, it's being strangled. Risa gasps in horror and asks if there's anything they can do. Biting his lip, Ash's mind begins to spin rapidly. He tells Risa that the first thing they need to do is get Tyranitar away from any bystanders that can get hurt. Looking around, he spots a small courtyard not far from where they are and a plan begins to form. Pointing the courtyard out to Risa, he asks her and Pikachu to herd Tyranitar towards it while he and Meowth head there to meet them. Risa asks just how she's supposed to do that, and Ash explains how Pikachu knows Thunderbolt. If they keep their distance, they can fire Thunderbolt at the path or the wall of a building to make Tyranitar go in the opposite direction. Taking a deep breath, Risa agrees and the two groups split up. Back over with Callahan, Sudowoodo is frantically dodging the attacks of the Golduck until it suddenly finds itself stuck between the Golduck and Callahan. Callahan stands there, looking down at the ball in his hands with a thoughtful expression for a few moments. Then, he turns to the two Pokemon and throws the ball. Sudowoodo cries out in fear, closing its eyes and flinging its arms over its head, waiting for the ball to hit it. Only for the sound of a Pokemon capture to ring out behind it. Turning around, it's just in time to see the Golduck that had been chasing it completely sucked into the ball, before it falls to the ground near it. Spotting Callahan walking towards it and the ball out of the corner of its eye, it frantically runs to hide behind a nearby tree. Callahan pays it no mind, simply leaning down to pick up the Pokeball. When he glances over at Sudowoodo, it quickly attempts to pretend to be a tree, expecting him to attempt to capture it too. Instead, Callahan simply turns around and begins to walk off. As he walks, he tells Sudowoodo that it shouldn't lie to itself, because once you develop a habit for it, it's hard to kick it. As he makes his way out of the little alcove, he ignores Torrent's comments about how imitation is part of Sudowoodo's natural instincts. Instead, he tells him to find the next Pokemon. Behind him, Sudowoodo watches him leave, its eyes shining with awe. Back over with Risa and Pikachu, they've managed to make good headway on getting Tyranitar to head in the direction of the courtyard. Jumping over a little banister, the trainer and partner are able to see that they've almost made it. With a shout, Risa calls for Pikachu to keep Tyranitar on course. With a firm nod, Pikachu unleashes a powerful Thunderbolt right behind Tyranitar, urging it through the archway into the courtyard. On top of the arch, Ash and Meowth spot their cue and, together, jump onto Tyranitar's back. There, Ash pulls out a switchblade from one of his belt pouches while Meowth readies his claws. With a shout of "now" from Ash, they swiftly cut the rope with their respective tools, reducing it to scrap. With the rope no longer strangling it, Tyranitar falls to the ground as Ash and Meowth quickly scramble off. Kneeling next to Tyranitar, Ash quickly sees that the rope has left dark bruises on the Pokemon's neck and fishes out a potion from another pouch as Risa walks up to them. After tending to Tyranitar's injuries, they help it to its feet. Assured that the Pokemon will be okay now, Ash, Risa, and their Pokemon begin to make their way back to the central plaza. When they finally manage to make it back, the sun is beginning to set, and Ash is wondering if they should have just headed back to the hotel, since they've missed the rest of the catch race. Risa laughs and says that they can still watch the award ceremony and see who won. Giving a tired smile, Ash nods as they stand at the back of the crowd, waiting for the winner to be announced. To their surprise, however, instead of announcing the winner, the announcer requests that Ash and Risa come up to the stage. Confused and unsure, they make their way up there. Once they are on the stage for everyone to see, the announcer explains that, due to their courage and teamwork in rescuing Tyranitar, they are being given the Mayor's prize. As Mayor Oliver walks up to them with the trophy, Ash is hit with a sudden bout of stage fright, causing him to stare at his feet as his face heats up, standing completely still. Taking pity on her friend, Risa accepts the trophy for the both of them, while patting his shoulder sympathetically. Meowth pats his head while trying not to laugh. Next is the announcement of the winner of the catch race, who is Callahan. As Callahan holds up the trophy with a big smile for his cheering niece to see, Margot walks up to watch from the back of the crowd. Callahan grins as he holds the trophy, glad that he was able to keep his promise to Kelly until the announcer asks if there are any Pokemon he wants to catch next. He flounders for a moment before remembering his run-in with Risa and Ash and how Pikachu is supposedly a rare Pokemon that was handpicked by Professor Oak. He tells the announcer that he's heard of a rare Pokemon in the area that even one of the great Pokemon professors hasn't been able to tame. Behind him, Risa and Ash frown, seeing the lie for what it is. At the back of the crowd, Margot turns and begins to walk swiftly away. With the day drawing to a close, Harriet is slowly making her way home. As she is walking, she swears that she can feel something watching her, but every time she looks back, there's nothing there. Deciding that she must be imagining things, she continues on her way. But even with all of her attempts to ignore it, the feeling of something following her doesn't go away. Elsewhere, Callahan is walking back to the hotel with his family, carrying Kelly on his back. His chipper mood is interrupted, however, when he notices the Sudowoodo following along beside him. Giving the Pokemon a look, he asks why it's following them, as he's already returned all the Pokemon he caught during the catch race, and he never caught Sudowoodo in the first place. Seeing the interaction between the two, Mia can't help but laugh. Smiling, she asks if the Pokemon is following them because it likes her brother, receiving an affirming nod from the Mimic Pokemon. Callahan simply huffs, telling the Sudowoodo to go find someone else to bother while pulling ahead. Behind him, Mia gives the Sudowoodo an encouraging wink, before they continue after the now cranky man. At the home of Margot and her father, after the sun has gone down, the family of two are having dinner and talking about their day. Halfway through the meal, Margot tries to tentatively bring up what Callahan had said. This earns laughter from her father, who brushes off the rumor until Margot attempts to bring up the stories of Zeraora. Turning serious, Oliver scolds his daughter for bringing up the Pokemon, telling her to never speak of it again. Margot deflates, wondering why she'd even tried. Her father has never listened to her before. Not about the bullies, not about the mountain. So why had she ever hoped that this would be any different? He wouldn't listen to her. He never did. She was on her own, like always. Ash looks down at his rotophone as the Pokemon channel replays the announcement that Callahan had made at the end of the catch race, a deep frown on his face. He looks to the side as Meowth hops up onto the banister beside him. "You've been out here for a while. You want to tell me why you're glaring at your phone like it personally offended you?" Ash gives a half-hearted snort of laughter before turning back to his phone. He explains that he can't stop thinking about Callahan's latest fib. Lying to his niece to keep her good opinion of him is one thing, but telling the whole world that there's some super rare Pokemon here is stupid. Now, every trainer, poacher, and their Poochyena are going to be flocking here to try and find it. And that's going to cause so many problems for the poor Pokemon that actually live here. Meowth pats his side sympathetically, knowing just how Ash feels. Ever since Ash found out about Meowth's past, he's been very sensitive about the topic of people catching Pokemon completely at random or for profit. And it only got worse after they'd found Ruby as an egg. He knows that Ash wants to march right onto the mountain and set up camp in order to catch and clobber any poachers or selfish trainers that dare disturb the peaceful lives that the Pokemon have built for themselves. But he also knows that, with their track record, they'll end up running into any poachers that show up even without going looking for them. He says as much to Ash, earning a slightly more genuine snort of laughter. With that, the two head to bed. On the other side of the town, in a 2-story house, Harriet lets out a shout of shock as she witnesses her home being turned into chaos by a bunch of little, wild Pokemon. There's a Togepi rummaging through a box of knickknacks and tossing them about, a Marill running around the room and tugging at the rugs and tablecloths, and a Totodile jumping up onto the shelves and knocking over the very fragile items there, including a golden box with an emerald lid which she very quickly grabs out of the way of the young Pokemon. The only one not causing a mess is the Xatu, who's just standing in the corner of the room watching the chaos unfold completely nonplussed. Harriet frowns deeply at the crocodile Pokemon, telling him that the box is strictly off limits. Totodile simply gives a big smile and jumps from the shelf, intending to land on top of Harriet. Giving a frightened shout, she tells him to stay away from her before making a quick escape out the front door. There, she watches the shadows of the Pokemon inside as they continue to make a mess of her house, before, with a heavy sigh, she sits in the armchair on her porch. This is going to be a long night. In the Pokemon Research Center, Tauren is cleaning up Staryu after all of its hard work that day, as the director is leaving, turning off the lights in the main lab with a smile. Meanwhile, Team Rocket is sneaking through the darkened room, looking for anything that might be worth a lot of money for them to steal. Before they can decide on what to take, there's a loud crash behind them. As the trio make a hasty retreat, Tauren comes out of his personal lab to see what's going on. With his Pokemon spreading out, the source of the crash is quickly found. A beaker of silvery liquid made from Smeargle ink sits smashed on the floor, with the liquid covering the table and floor. As he carefully picks up the shards of glass and cleans up the mess, he wonders just what had knocked the beaker over. The next morning, Ash and Meowth meet up with Risa and Pikachu before heading out to a nearby park. While Pikachu runs around playing with the local Pokemon and Meowth keeps an eye on him, Ash and Risa sit on a bench to watch. After a few moments of silence, Ash notices that Risa seems to be thinking deeply about something. Penny for your thoughts? Giving a bit of a chuckle, Risa explains that she was just thinking about the situation with Tyranitar the other day. She's never done anything close to a Pokemon battle before. And even though it was just hurting Tyranitar towards Ash and Meowth, she was still calling for Pikachu to use specific attacks and trusting him to carry them out. It brought up feelings that she hasn't felt in a long time. Curious, Ash asks her to elaborate. Smiling, Risa tells him that she's been training in track and field since she was little, so the idea of Pokemon battles never even crossed her mind. Grinning, Ash asks if that means she's quick on her feet. Grinning proudly, she stands from the bench and tells him that she's actually a regional champion. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, her smile disappears, replaced with a somber look. With a voice full of melancholy, she tells Ash about her injury and how it made her scared to run again. Even yesterday with Tyranitar, she wasn't running, she was just walking quickly. Getting up off the bench, Ash stands beside her with an understanding smile. He tells her that he knows how she feels. She may not believe it, but he's got a pretty nasty temper. It used to really scare him. Sometimes, he even thought of himself as a monster because of it. But then, he made the most amazing friends, and built a family that really helped him. And now, he's not as scared anymore. Because he knows that, no matter what, as long as he has those that care about him, he can handle anything. He looks over to where Pikachu is playing with an Eevee and smiles. You definitely have Pikachu in your corner. And me too. Risa smiles gratefully, and she looks like she's about to say something when their attention is drawn to the loud wail of a siren. Looking to the road, they see Officer Jenny driving her bike towards the center of town. Worry gnawing their insides, they rush to see what's going on. Meanwhile, Harriet is marching into the Pokemon Research Center, demanding to speak to Tauren. Half hiding behind his Chansey, Tauren asks what she needs, to which Harriet directs his attention to the menagerie that is currently following her, telling him that they've been following her since yesterday. Tauren realizes what must have happened quickly, directing Harriet's attention to the vial of pink liquid that she'd knocked into the previous day. He explains that it's a chemical extracted from the move Sweet Scent. However, before he can begin explaining exactly what they're planning on using the chemical for, Harriet cuts him off, demanding that he neutralize the scent right away. Nervously, Tauren explains that he hasn't got anything prepared, only for the director to come running in, frantically telling the pair that something has happened. Outside, a large crowd has gathered around a line of police tape, sectioning off the tram cross-section, which has had rocks shoved into the tracks. Standing at the front of the crowd, Oliver stands with Margot as Officer Jenny reports the long list of vandalism that had been discovered that morning. While Oliver frowns, wondering who would do something like this, Margot stares on impassively. Close by, Ash and Risa meet up with Callahan and his family again. Turning to the crowd, Oliver apologizes for the inconvenience and assures that they'll make an announcement once the damage has been dealt with and the festival is able to be reopened. Hearing this, Ash walks up to Oliver and Margot. After saying a quick hello to the girl, he offers him and his friends his help. Behind him, Kelly asks her uncle if they can help out too, quickly being backed up by Oliver. Nervously, Callahan says that he's actually expected to give a guest talk at a Pokemon conference taking place at the Pokemon Research Center. Before Risa can call Callahan a liar, Ash cuts in, asking if Callahan is the one that Tauren got to be the replacement speaker. At everyone else's confusion, Ash explains the conversation that he'd gotten caught in the middle of the other day. Turning back to Callahan, he assures the man that, with the whole town basically shut down right now, the conference is likely to be delayed until things are fixed up at least a little. So, the sooner they get things fixed, the sooner he can give his guest talk. He even suggests that Callahan help clean up the area around the center so that he doesn't have to rush over once the conference is back on. At the mention of the researcher, Meowth gets an idea and jumps from Ash's shoulder. He tells Ash to start without him, he's going to get some extra hands. Over at the research center, Tauren is bringing some food for the Pokemon that are following Harriet, which have increased by 1 Smoochum since she arrived. Watching the researcher care for the Pokemon, Harriet is reminded of a conference that was supposed to be happening today. Before she can ask about it, however, a Meowth walking on its hind legs walks into the lab, one that she recognizes from the day before. Walking in, Meowth starts to ask about getting some extra help in cleaning up the vandalism outside, only to cut himself off in his surprise at seeing so many Pokemon in the one place. Blinking a few times in surprise, he turns to the 2 humans, asking just what is going on here. To which Tauren explains the situation with the sweet scent chemical. Oh, so that's what that smell was. I thought you was just wearing perfume. He then gets back to why he'd come, asking if they and the Pokemon could help with the cleanup. Harriet rolls her eyes and tells Meowth good luck with trying to get these Pokemon to leave her alone. Meowth tilts his head and comments that being drawn to sweet scent doesn't stop Pokemon from leaving. These Pokemon can leave anytime they like. Frowning, Harriet asks why they don't then. Giving a slight snicker, Meowth says that he thinks it's obvious before turning to the small group of Pokemon and asking if they'll help out, saying that the sooner they get things fixed, the sooner Harriet can stop worrying. Just as the woman is about to speak, there is a resounding chorus of agreement from the group. Harriet watches in stunned and confused silence as Meowth leads the group outside to begin the cleanup. A little while later, over with Ash and the others, they've almost managed to clean up all of the soap that had been spread all over the wooden path. Callahan had been sent off to clean closer to the research center so that he could get there quickly for the conference, while Mia and Kelly stayed with their new friends. Ash is pulling off his cap to fan his face when he hears a group of young voices and looks over to see the trio that had been picking on Margot the other day. They're complaining very loudly about having to clean up and mentioning something about a curse. Rolling his eyes, Ash calls over to the boys, telling them to stop blaming them having to work for once on some kind of curse as he puts his hat back on. Irritated, the boys tell Ash that they're not making it up. There used to be a Pokemon called Zeraora that lived on the mountain. However, it disappeared when the mountain caught fire 50 years ago. Ever since then, the whole mountain has been cursed. If ever a human sets foot on the mountain, it'll bring disaster. Ash's eye twitches in irritation and he's about to say something when Margot snaps that it's a lie. Looking over at the pink-haired girl, he sees her trembling and her eyes squeezed shut. Reaching over, he gives her head a light pat, drawing her attention, before giving her an understanding smile. Seeing it, Margot blinks before smiling back at him. At that moment, Oliver announces over the PA system that the safety standards have been met at all locations, meaning that the festival is back on. Cheering happily, Kelly asks her mother if they can go watch Callahan's presentation at the research center now that they've finished helping out. Smiling, Mia says that she doesn't see why not, before turning to Ash and Risa, asking if they'd like to come along. They both agree, Ash wanting to see how Callahan's showmanship will go over with a stuffy conference, and Risa wanting to see for herself if the man was actually telling the truth. Over at the Pokemon Research Center, Callahan arrives from where he was working at the same time that Meowth returns with all of Harriet's little followers. Approaching the woman, he notices that a Machamp has now joined the entourage, much to Harriet's annoyance. Tauren thanks Callahan for arriving so quickly before handing him the SD card he'd grabbed from his desk earlier. He explains that it has the images and video clips for the presentation and that all Callahan needs to do is put it into the computer. Callahan nods in understanding as they begin to make their way up the steps, going over the contents of the presentation one more time as they go. Behind them, Harriet and Meowth watch them go with slight frowns. Harriet wonders out loud if they're really going to be okay, not expecting a reply. However, Meowth still answers. Callahan may be a bit of a mess, but he's good at giving a performance. But for some reason, I can't shake this bad feeling. Not long after, the conference begins, with Ash, Risa, Mia, and Kelly all making it just in time to watch the opening. As the lights dim and the high-tech windows switch to video mode, Callahan steps out from the backroom lab, where he'd been waiting to make his appearance with Tauren, Harriet, and the Pokemon. Stepping out onto the stage, he gives a deep bow before confidently walking over to the podium on the side. Once he's in position, he greets the audience, welcoming them to the conference and introducing himself as the guest speaker and fellow Pokemon lover, Callahan. At the back, Kelly bounces up and down excitedly before turning to her mum and asking if they can get a bit closer. Mia smiles softly at her daughter before telling her that she's not sure if there's any room further up. Kelly's face falls until Ash points out that there's still a lot of empty space around the edge of the room, so if they're fine with hugging the wall, they could easily get up to the front. Kelly jumps up and down excitedly as she tugs her mum's hand, asking if they can. With a fond and exasperated sigh, she agrees and the two walk around the edge of the crowd while Ash, Risa, and their Pokemon remain at the back. At the front of the room, Callahan finally reaches the part of the conference where the PowerPoint that Tauren prepared is needed. Pulling out the SD card that Tauren had given him, he puts it into the computer and hits play, only for his blood to freeze as he hears Tauren's voice and sees a familiar scene. The scene of him catching a Cyndaquil during the catch race just yesterday. Acting fast, he stops the recording before apologizing to the crowd, claiming that was some data for a different research project that isn't ready for presentation yet. He asks them to wait a moment while he gets the correct SD card. Just as he's about to open the door, however, it bursts open in a plume of smoke. 3 figures come barreling into him, knocking him off his feet and down the stairs to where Kelly and Mia are standing. The force of the fall knocks his Pokeball out of his pocket, causing it to land with a smack on the floor, causing it to click open and reveal nothing inside. Meanwhile, Harriet steps through the doors, coughing from the smoke while shouting that some robbers are getting away. Looking around, Ash quickly spots the all too familiar Team Rocket running away from the research center. Calling to Meowth, the two take off after the criminals. This time, when Pikachu attempts to go after them, he finds himself surrounded by people desperately running to get away from the smoke. Back over with Callahan, he's picking himself up off of the floor when he sees his sister and niece behind him. Kelly staring at the empty Pokeball on the floor as tears well up in her eyes. With a sinking feeling in his gut, Callahan realizes that she knows. His Kelly is smart. From where the two were standing, they would have had a clear view of the screen showing when he caught that Cyndaquil, and after seeing the empty Pokeball, it wouldn't have been hard to figure out, no matter how fast he stopped the video. Turning to face her uncle, Kelly's lip wobbles before she shouts, tears now falling down her face. I hate you! Turning, she runs, aiming for the exit. With her hands covering her eyes, she doesn't realize that she's heading right for the smoke until it enters her lungs and she's suddenly on her knees coughing. Acting fast, Callahan and Mia pull her out of the smoke and towards a separate door, where the smoke has already dissipated. There, they sit as they try to help her cough out all of the smoke from her lungs. As the smoke finally starts to dissipate, Risa walks carefully through the slowly clearing room, calling out for Pikachu. Spotting a glimpse of yellow through the smoke, she walks towards it, only to gasp in horror as the smoke finally clears. There, lying on the ground, covered in scrapes and bruises and tears of pain in his eyes, is Pikachu. Crying out Pikachu's name, she drops to her knees next to him, panic squeezing her heart like a vice and almost robbing her of her breath as she tries to think of what to do. Noticing the situation with the smoke clear, Tauren rushes over to them, his Chansey not far behind. Kneeling next to them, he begins to examine Pikachu. After a few moments, he assures Risa that he's going to be fine, before turning to Chansey and instructing her to use Heal Pulse. Behind them, Harriet watches the whole thing, her grip tightening on her walking stick. Meanwhile, Ash and Meowth are racing after Team Rocket through the back alleys of Fula. The crooks are right in front of them, but even though Ash and Meowth are fast, Jessie and James are adults with longer legs, and Porygon levitates, so they're not gaining any ground. Hoping to stop the group in their tracks, Ash tells Meowth to hit them with Dark Thunder. In response, Porygon throws up Protect, causing the attack to detonate without hitting its targets, and fill the alley with smoke and dust. When Ash and Meowth manage to exit the alley into open air, Team Rocket is already gone. That night, everyone sits in the lobby of the hotel room, waiting for Ash to return and Nurse Joy to come out with Pikachu. Never before has Risa been so grateful that the hotel has a Pokemon Center attachment. Spotting the nurse coming out from the back room, Risa rushes over to her, her heart in her throat. Nurse Joy smiles at her reassuringly, telling her that, thanks to the quick first aid from Tauren and Chansey, Pikachu will make a full recovery. His leg is still in a little pain, but as long as they take care not to aggravate it and Pikachu gets rest, it should be as good as new in a few days. Thanking Nurse Joy for her help, Risa takes Pikachu into her arms, holding him close as she walks back to the others. At the same time, Callahan comes down the steps, his head bowed, refusing to meet anyone's eye. Spotting him, Tauren immediately asks if Kelly is alright. Callahan takes a seat at the circle of small plush ottomans. In a voice completely devoid of any of its usual enthusiasm, he explains that the doctor has just finished checking her. She was born with a weak body, unable to keep up with her exuberant personality. The last few days, combined with the smoke in the research center, must have taken their toll. Tauren lowers his head with a pained expression, telling Callahan that this is his fault. However, before he can begin to explain exactly what excuse he could have possibly thought up to come to that conclusion, Callahan cuts him off. He's her uncle. He's the one that's been lying to her all this time. This is on him. There's a long few seconds of silence as everyone tries to think of what to do or say, when the automatic door to the hotel quietly opens, and in walks Ash and Meowth. Turning to the duo, Tauren asks how it went. Frowning apologetically, Ash explains that they weren't able to find the jerks or what they stole from Tauren's lab. He turns to Risa, about to say something, when he notices that Pikachu is hurt. Worried, he asks what happened and Risa explains before assuring the boy that Pikachu will be fine. Ash gives a relieved smile before it falls into a scowl. If I ever get my hands on those pests! Before his temper can get too out of hand, he takes a deep breath to calm himself. He then turns back to Tauren, asking exactly what it was that Team Rocket stole. Tauren explains that it was a concentration of the spores found on Pokemon with the ability Effect Spore. He also tells Ash that he's called Officer Jenny and that she's going to investigate the theft. There's another long moment of silence before Harriet, ever the responsible one, suggests that they all head to bed. It's been a long, stressful and exhausting day for everyone. Everyone nods quietly before heading back to either their homes or their hotel rooms. Callahan opens the door with barely a squeak when he gets back to the hotel room he's been sharing with his family. He walks into the main room so quietly that he's almost silent. When he enters the room, Mia is awake and sitting on one of the beds, while Kelly is sleeping soundly in the bed in front of her. Turning to Mia, he asks her how Kelly is doing in a hushed voice. In a voice just as quiet, she tells him that she's sleeping right now, but she's thinking of taking her home tomorrow. Nodding in understanding, Callahan turns to leave. Slightly startled, she asks him where he's going. Refusing to turn around, he admits that he doesn't know, but Kelly doesn't want to see his face anymore. Not after I let her down. He gets out the front door of the hotel before he hears the calls of Sudowoodo behind him. Refusing to turn around, he continues walking, not even turning around when he hears the smack of something solid and stony landing hard on the pavement. There's a brief pause in the calls following behind him until Sudowoodo is calling again, his rocky feet making clacking sounds on the pavement. Stopping in his tracks, Callahan tells the Pokemon to go away, stomping his foot on the ground. This causes the Mimic Pokemon to freeze, standing just a few steps behind him. Refusing to turn around, Callahan tells him that it's not even like Sudowoodo is even his Pokemon. He deserves to have his words thrown back in his face. So why isn't Sudowoodo doing that? Why didn't Ash do that? He should have listened to the kid before. But there's no point in following a failure, so Sudowoodo should just go somewhere else. Sudowoodo stands there silently as he watches Callahan walk away. What could he do? What could he say to make this better? Harriet frowns as she walks up the steps of her home, her petite procession of Pokemon following behind her. As she reaches the top steps, she turns to them, smacking her cane on the cement of her front step. She tells the group that she's told them over and over again not to follow her. She knows that the Sweet Center isn't forcing them to be here, so she has no reason to put up with this nonsense. Opening her door, she mutters under her breath before walking in and closing and locking it behind her. It's better to be alone. Up in her hotel room, Risa gently strokes Pikachu's head as he sleeps soundly in the bed. Her heart feels like it's being torn in two every time she looks at his bandaged leg. If she had just tried to run, I could have protected you. Margot stands in the doorway of her father's office as he finishes up a call. She calls out to him as he puts the phone back on the receiver. He turns to her as she asks about the Wind Festival, before giving her a reassuring smile and telling her that the committee has decided to reopen it tomorrow. They'll be tightening security to ensure that there aren't any more pranks. Margot smiles back with practiced ease, proclaiming how glad she is. Her father assures her that there's no need to worry, they'll just call on Lugia tomorrow. Nodding, Margot bids him goodnight before making her way up to her room, her smile dropping the moment she's out of sight. Instead of heading back to bed, she walks out onto her balcony, looking out over the bright lights of the city as the warm wind blows around her. Her eyes are distant as she thinks. Then, they harden with resolve. There's still one thing she can try. As everyone in Fula City sleeps in varying levels of distress, in the middle of the mountain forest, Team Rocket is celebrating a successful job. Each taking a gulp of their lumberry juice as they simply savor the victory. Grinning, Jessie holds out her hand to her compatriots, telling them to bring out the spoils of their victory. The two's eyes widen in shock, James saying that he thought Jessie had it. Frowning in confusion, Jessie says that she gave it to Porygon. Porygon gives her a flat look before lifting up its side appendages as if to say, "Do you see any opposable thumbs or even fingers on me?" Frowning, Jessie wonders just who it was that she'd flung the sphere to, completely missing the bigger issue that is concerning both James and Porygon. The fact that they've lost the thing that was meant to be getting their budget back in the green. The next morning, Harriet looks out her window to find her fan club still outside, having chosen to sleep on either the little armchair on her porch or the bench out front of her house. Frowning, she's about to turn right back around and go back to bed when she catches something strange in the corner of her eye. But that couldn't be, right? Turning to face it fully, Harriet's eyes widen in shock before she's grabbing her cane and rushing out the front door, still in her nightgown. The noise caused by her rush wakes up the still dozing Pokemon before she's even down the steps. Standing in front of her home, she stares up at the windmill that she's always been able to see turning at a steady pace from her front window. Only now, it's completely still. Ash is just finishing getting ready for the day when he hears a knock on his door. Opening it up, he's surprised to see Risa standing there, with Pikachu in her arms. Frowning in confusion, Ash asks her if they weren't meeting up in the lobby. Risa confirms that they were, but it seems that something is going on outside, and she thought that he'd want to see what's up. Nodding, Ash calls to Meowth before they all head out to see what's going on. Stepping out of the hotel, the first thing that Ash notices is the vast number of people milling about in the street. Not walking around or anything, just standing frozen. There's something off that he can't quite place. It's like the whole world has gone still. Risa taps his shoulder and points to one of the nearby windmills and it clicks. The blades are completely still. There's no wind. Fula City lives and dies by its wind. Without it, not even the trams will be running. What had Margot told him? Lugia sees the eternal flame and then it sends the wind. He snaps his head in the direction of the eternal flame, but the aquamarine glow that had been there only yesterday is now gone. Worry nodding his insides, Ash begins to make his way to where the eternal flame is held, calling Risa to follow. Meanwhile, the Pokemon Research Center is still a mess from the disaster that was yesterday. Tauren stands just outside the doorway to the main lab as his co-workers clean up the lab from the mess that Team Rocket had left. From his hidden spot, he can hear them talking, asking why they're the ones cleaning this mess up, since it's all Tauren's fault that the conference was a bust. Just what was he thinking bringing in a fool that has no experience in Pokemon research? One of them says that they never should have allowed their results to be released with his. Deciding that he's heard enough, Tauren walks out the back to the outside. Inside with the other scientists, the director sternly tells them all to be quiet. Turning to them, he demands to know who among them could have done better than Tauren the other day. Which of them would have been able to find a new guest speaker on such short notice? The presentation that Tauren had put together may not have been shown yesterday, but he knows for a fact that they've all seen it. And which of them would have been able to put together a presentation that weaved together the results of such different research so seamlessly, and in a way that could be understandable to anyone? Which of them knows more about Pokemon and how to ensure their well-being than Tauren? The other scientists all look away, thoroughly chastised. While outside, Tauren sits curled up under a tree, just trying to block out the world. Mia stands in line for the gondola with Kelly clutching her hand. Looking down, she can see the despondent look on her face. Softly, she asks if her feet are alright, earning a small nod from her daughter. Kelly looks up at her mum, asking where her uncle is. Forcing a smile to her face, Mia tells her that he'd said he was going home. Turning her eyes back to the ground, Kelly clutches her doll tightly. In a small voice, she tells her mother that she thinks she said something bad to him. Mia forces herself to keep her smile on her face. Kneeling down, she places her hand on the back of the doll, turning it to face her child while, in a high-pitched voice, telling her to cheer up and that her uncle doesn't mind at all. She had hoped that Sudowoodo would have been able to talk Callahan into coming back, but clearly that hadn't worked. Now she has no idea where her brother is, and her daughter is blaming herself. She'd told him not to lie to Kelly, and now here she is doing the same thing. But it would be okay, right? She just needed to turn her lie into a truth by bringing Callahan back. She could do that. Oh, who was she kidding? She's a hypocrite. The courtyard beneath the tower where the Eternal Flame is housed is full of people when Ash, Risa, and their Pokemon arrive. They quickly spot Oliver and Harriet and rush over to them. Spotting them, Oliver tells them that no one knows where the Eternal Flame has gone, while Harriet explains that they need to get it back in place no later than dawn tomorrow, or Lugia will believe that Fula has lost its connection between people and Pokemon and abandoned the city. Face hardening with resolve, Ash asks if they can take a look, to which Oliver agrees. Ash covers his ears with his hands, protecting his eardrums from Risa's screams as the elevator platform raises them up to the top of the tower. As they reach the top, she shrieks that she hates heights. Ash finally pulls his hands away from his ears, telling her that she didn't need to come up with them. She could have stayed on the ground. As Ash, Meowth, and Pikachu walk around, Pikachu with a little bit of a limp, the two Pokemon's noses twitch. They sniff around the area where the Eternal Flame had been housed before turning to each other. "You smell that too?" Pikachu nods in affirmation. Ash asks what it is that they've picked up on. Meowth tells him that they've got a scent. It's familiar, but there's something weird about it. He directs the humans to follow them. In the forest, two men march through the trees, launching nets at any Pokemon that they come across. They laugh as they claim their newest catch, joking about how Pokemon poaching is the perfect job. Good pay and plenty of open, fresh air. Back over with Ash and his friends, Meowth has led them to the Pokemon Research Center, and with it, Tauren and his Smeargle. Running up to the scientist, Meowth asks him if he's ever made anything out of something from Smeargle. Confused, Tauren tells him that he's made essence of Smeargle ink and a few other small experiments. But why is Meowth asking? Ash explains that the Eternal Flame has been stolen and Meowth and Pikachu picked up a scent that was like Smeargle's. Tauren suddenly remembers the beaker of Smeargle ink that had been broken the other night and runs to get his black light before telling them to take him to the Eternal Flame Tower. Once they're there, now with the presence of Oliver and Harriet, Tauren explains that he'd been planning on using the Smeargle ink for marking and such. However, once the ink has been distilled, it becomes invisible unless exposed to the light of a black light. Turning on his black light, he points it at the ground, revealing two sets of footprints. One going to where the Eternal Flame had once been, and one leading away. Now all they need to do is follow the second set of footprints and they'll find their thief. Margot sits on the step of the abandoned town hall, Teddiursa and Ditto sitting next to her. On her other side, resting against the half-crumbled wall, sits the Eternal Flame. Staring at the softly glowing crystal, she wonders if the festival has been called off yet. Turning to look behind her, she forces a smile to her face as she tells her hidden friend not to worry. She's going to protect them. Her heart leaps into her throat as she hears the sound of people coming and quickly ushers Teddiursa and Ditto to take cover behind a rock with the Eternal Flame, while she hides behind the crumbling wall of the building. Picking her head around the wall, she sees two men coming toward her. With their voices so loud, she can easily hear their conversation, talking about finding and capturing the rare Pokemon that had been mentioned at the catch race. Steeling herself, she puts on the most innocent expression she can and steps out of hiding, asking the men what they're doing all the way out there. The men greet her in a friendly way, asking if she lives around here and if she's seen any Pokemon that aren't found anywhere else. Seeing right through their friendly facades, Margot tells them that she has, and it should be somewhere near the big waterfall. The men thank her and are about to leave when Teddiursa, thinking that the coast is clear, pokes his head out from behind the rock that he and Ditto were hiding behind. Spotting the two Pokemon, the men pull out their Pokeballs. Seeing this, Margot rushes to put herself between the two poachers, claiming that these two Pokemon are hers. Unfortunately, Pokemon poachers aren't exactly known to care about whether or not the Pokemon already has a trainer, just if it can fetch them a high price. And so they bring out their Pokemon, a Houndoom and a Sneasel. Margot stands her ground, refusing to let these men take her friends, and believing that no one would ever be foolish or evil enough to launch an attack on a child. Unfortunately, she is very much mistaken, as the poachers command their Pokemon to attack with Flamethrower and Icy Wind. Margot closes her eyes as she braces for the pain, only for them to fly open as there's a loud boom, completely devoid of pain. As the smoke clears, she sees the familiar figure of Zeraora standing between her and the poachers. Eyes wide with fear, she tells Zeraora to go hide. Zeraora stands his ground, glaring at the poachers and their Pokemon. Recovering from their shock, the poachers quickly begin to launch attacks at Zeraora, which the electric type quickly counters, moving so fast that they might as well be teleporting and sending the two dark types flying. However, this counter comes at a cost, for with it already being injured, it cannot fight for long, collapsing from pain and exhaustion. The poachers approach slowly, their faces fixed into smug grins as one pulls out their net gun. Seeing the gun-like weapon, Margot quickly puts herself between the poachers and Zeraora, refusing to let them take her friend. The poacher fires as Margot closes her eyes and waits for the inevitable. Then, a strange sound reaches her ears. It's like the metallic sound of Irontail, but lower and overlaid with a sound that's almost like a low growl. Looking up, she sees the familiar silhouette of Meowth, surrounded by the destroyed pieces of the poacher's net, his tail encased in a silvery black aura. The aura dissipates as the Scratch Cat lands and is quickly joined by a familiar boy wearing a cap. Ash looks at Margot over his shoulder, his expression soft as he tells her that she did well. She doesn't have to worry anymore, because help has arrived. He turns back to the poachers, all the previous softness gone and replaced with burning, all-consuming fury. Reaching into one of his belt pouches, he pulls out a long length of rope, not once taking his eyes off the poachers. With a voice that is eerily calm despite the rage in his eyes, he tells the poachers that they don't even deserve the courtesy of a 5-second head start. With that, Ash and Meowth rush the poachers, nimbly dodging the attacks of their Pokemon. While Meowth distracts the poachers' Pokemon, Ash wraps them up in rope, the men having not expected the kid to come after them directly. Before the poachers can call for their Pokemon to destroy the ropes binding them, Ash takes their Pokeballs and returns the Houndoom and Sneasel. With that, he sits on them, causing them to let out gasps as he knocks the wind out of them. Glaring down at them, he tells them to sit tight because Officer Jenny is on her way. Standing off to the side of the scene, Risa stares at her friend, completely stunned that her usually laid-back friend is capable of being so scary. Remind me to never get on your bad side. With the poachers now tied up and unable to do anything, Tauren shines the black light at Margot's shoes, confirming that they're covered in Smeargle ink. While Margot looks sadly at Zeraora's wounds, he moves to a light coming from behind a rock, finding the eternal flame. Oliver kneels down next to his daughter as she refuses to look at him. He demands to know if she realizes just how much trouble she's caused with her actions. Why she did something so reckless and foolish. Margot's voice hardens as she asks exactly what he thinks she should have done. Surprised by the tone in his daughter's voice, he tells her that she should have come to him. Before he can even finish his sentence, Margot turns to glare at her father, tears of sadness and frustration falling down her cheeks as she shouts that she already tried. She's tried so many times, but he never listens. Oliver is completely taken aback by his daughter's outburst. When was the last time she snapped like that? When was the last time she complained? Actually, when was the last time that they'd had anything more than a surface conversation? When was the last time that Margot had told him about her dreams or her fears? When was the last time they'd just sat down and talked to each other? Swallowing thickly, he looks his angry and hurt daughter in the eyes. I'm here now, Margot. I'm listening. Biting her lip, Margot turns back to Zeraora. Gently stroking the fur on their back, she begins to tell them about how she'd first met them. She'd been playing with Teddiursa and Ditto in the foothills of the mountain when a rock slide happened. The boulder should have crushed her, but Zeraora jumped in, catching the boulder and protecting her and the Pokemon. But because they'd taken the full weight and force of the boulder, they'd been badly hurt. It was her fault. So the least she could do was help them get better. Be their friend. But then, the winner of the catch race had talked about finding a rare Pokemon, and she knew that everyone who saw the Pokemon Channel's reports on the Wind Festival would come to capture Zeraora. She thought maybe if the Wind Festival was called off, everyone would leave. She tried to talk to her father about it, but he shut her down and refused to listen. Then, she tried to make the festival unsafe by making a mess. It almost worked, but then everyone cleaned it up in just a day. She knew that taking the Eternal Flame was dangerous, but she couldn't think of anything else, and she was going to put it back the moment the festival was cancelled. I just wanted to keep my friends safe. Gently, Oliver wipes away some of Margot's tears before stroking her head, just like he used to when she was younger. In a soft but serious voice, he thanks her for protecting Zeraora, and admits that there's something she needs to know. Slowly, he begins to explain to her and everyone else present about the truth regarding Zeraora and Zeraora's curse. He tells everyone about how Zeraora had once lived in the land that is now Fula City alongside the other Pokemon. They were the land's protector and only wanted to live in peace. But humans are a greedy species and cut down the nature that the Pokemon called home to enrich themselves. The fire that had happened 50 years ago was caused by humans. Everyone was panicking, but the only one that gave any thought to the Pokemon that were most in danger of the fire was Zeraora. Ever since that day, Zeraora has held a grudge against humans. And he honestly can't blame them. The fire hadn't been the only thing that humans had done to Zeraora. It was just the straw that broke the Numble's back. In the years leading up to the fire, people had been going into the forest hoping to hunt down and catch Zeraora. The fire had been caused by one such group, hoping to draw Zeraora out using the fire. The previous mayor, hoping to make up for this and prevent future incidents, had lied to the townspeople, claiming that Zeraora had vanished and the mountain was now cursed. It was the only thing people could think of to protect Zeraora. Ash scoffs at that, a scowl now firmly on his face. Only way to protect Zeraora, my foot! They weren't trying to protect Zeraora, they were just protecting themselves. They didn't want to deal with the guilt that came with acknowledging that they screwed up, so they decided to lie and paint Zeraora as a monster. A spooky story. That's not protecting them, that's just pure selfishness. Margot may have been going about it the wrong way, but her focus was always on making sure Zeraora was safe, even if no one listened to her. Seriously, what is it with this city and— Before he can finish his tirade, they're almost blown over by a sudden gust of strong wind. Looking in the direction that the wind had come from, they all see a massive cloud of purple-black smoke. Nervously, Risa suggests that it's something to do with the Wind Festival. However, that weak hope is quickly dashed as Tauren recognizes the smoke. At the same time, 3 Pidgey fall out of the sky behind them. Rushing over to the Pokemon, Tauren begins to examine them. Recognizing the symptoms, he tells them that this is likely Effect Spore. Ash recognizes that as what Team Rocket had stolen the other day. Tauren explains that the chemical, when breathed in, becomes a poison that numbs the body. He'd been researching ways that it could be used to combat human diseases when Team Rocket stole the capsule he stored it in. This is why they should quit thieving and find another job. They suck at it and only cause more problems. Everyone's attention is drawn to Oliver as his phone rings. Recognizing the number as that of his secretary, he puts her on speaker. The woman informs her employer that the smoke has engulfed a quarter of the city and is spreading. They're currently working on the evacuation, but they need Oliver to get to one of the safety houses quickly. Oliver thanks her for her report, telling her he understands before hanging up. For a few moments, all anyone can do is stand and watch as the smoke continues to spread. All of them are wondering what they can do. Then, squaring his shoulders, Ash steps forward, keeping his eyes on the smoke in the city, his eyes taking in every detail and his brain working at a mile a minute, calculating different strategies. Turning to look at the others behind him, he tells them that standing here and watching isn't going to do anyone any good. If they're going to protect Fula City, they're going to need to get their heads in gear. Risa gives Ash a skeptical look, asking how he expects them to do that all by themselves. Ash gives a snort as he turns to her fully, asking who said they were alone. They've got each other, they've got their Pokemon, and there are bound to be others that will help too. If it was just one of them, then Risa would have a point, but it's all of them. A friend of mine had a name for this. She called it the power of us, and in my experience, there's nothing in this world stronger. Risa laughs at that, calling it the corniest thing she's ever heard while Ash pokes his tongue out at her. Harriet smiles in amusement at the children, while Margot and Oliver nod to each other and Tauren asks Chansey if she thinks that they can do it. As one, they all turn back to Ash and Oliver says that it's worth a shot. He then turns to Tauren, asking if there's anything that could neutralize the smoke. Tauren responds that he could go back to the lab and produce large quantities of the chemical compound for natural cure, but without a way to spread it through the city, it'll be useless. Harriet tells him not to worry about that, they can use the old generator. Confused, Margot points out that everyone says that it's broken down. Harriet confirms this, but tells her not to worry. After all, she built that old generator. She explains that she built the propellers to spin both ways, so all they need to do is get it up and running and they'll be able to use the wind blown by the propellers to spread the cure all throughout the city. However, there's only a 50% chance that the old thing will even move anymore. She then turns to her Pokemon entourage, telling them that they'll need to help out too, as they're going to need some muscle. Ash tells Meowth to go with her too. He knows more about machines than anyone else Ash knows, so maybe he can help get the old rust heap moving. Then, Ash pulls out his Rotom phone and hits one of his speed dial numbers. As he waits for the call to go through, Risa asks just who he's calling. Backup. As soon as he hears the familiar voice of Professor Oak on the other end, he wastes no time on pleasantries. He tells the elderly professor that there's trouble in Fula City, and he's going to need some of his family to come in and help. He asks Oak to fetch Pidgeot, Espeon, Ordino, Sky, and Akio, and once they're all gathered, have Akio teleport them to his location. Knowing Ash very well by this point, Oak wastes no time in rushing to gather the Pokemon, completely forgetting to hang up and causing Ash to roll his eyes as he ends the call. A few moments later, 6 Pokemon appear next to Ash. A Pidgeot, an Espeon, an Ordino, an Altaria, a Gallade, and a shiny Zoroark. Ash's eyes widen in surprise as he sees Ruby, asking why she's here and who's looking after Topaz and Jade. Ruby tells her brother to calm down, explaining that Gary is visiting Oak this week and was able to take the twins while she came to help. Nodding in understanding, Ash turns to his friends, introducing them to the present members of his Pokefam, identifying the Altaria and Gallade as Sky and Akio respectively. With the introductions out of the way, he quickly explains the situation to his Pokefam, instructing Pidgeot, Sky, Espeon, and Akio to help with the evacuation, while Ordino and Ruby stay here to help with caring for the Pokemon affected by the smoke in Zeraora. Nodding in understanding, the 2 psychic types teleport away while the birds take flight, heading towards the city at top speed. Ash watches them go, wishing them good luck and telling them to be safe. In the city, Callahan is doing his best to run away from the smoke as he tries to get a hold of Mia and Kelly. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, he hears Mia's voice on the other end of the phone. Panicked, he asks her where they are and if they're okay. Mia tells him that they're both fine, unable to keep the nervousness out of her voice, as she explains that they're on the gondola. They seem to have come to an emergency stop and they haven't moved in a while. From the streets below, Callahan watches helplessly as the purple-black smoke engulfs the gondola. The last thing he hears is Kelly's frightened little voice asking her uncle to save them before the line cuts. Callahan stands in the now empty street, staring up at where the gondola carrying his family is hidden by the poisoned smoke, completely helpless. Kelly's frightened voice echoes in his head as memories of their time in Fula City flash before his eyes as tears fall from his face. Kelly asked him to save them, but what can he do? He's nothing but a stupid liar. He's broken out of his thoughts as he hears a familiar cry of Sudowoodo behind him. Hastily wiping away his tears, he snappily tells Sudowoodo that he told him to stop following him. Ignoring the comment, Sudowoodo grabs Callahan's hand and tries to drag him in the direction of the gondola, only for him to snatch his hand back. He angrily demands to know just what is with him. Sudowoodo fixes him with a firm look, pointing towards where the gondola was visible. Callahan's shoulders slump in utter defeat as he asks Sudowoodo just what he thinks they can do. All he does is lie and run away. They're both weak. Sudowoodo marches right up to Callahan, tears in his eyes. Before the man can pull back, the Mimic Pokemon grabs his hand and places something in it. Something round and slightly scuffed. Callahan's eyes widen as he realizes what it is before he even sees it. But how? He threw it in the trash last night. He knows he did. Sudowoodo removes his branch-like arms, revealing the dirty and scuffed old Pokeball that Callahan had been carrying for so long. Callahan wipes the tears threatening to fall from his eyes as he smiles at Sudowoodo. "You're not lying. You're actually willing to help me." He holds out the Pokeball as Sudowoodo reaches out and taps the button with his branch. In an instant, Sudowoodo's body turns into red energy and is sucked into the ball. There's not even a single shake, just a burst of small stars to indicate that the catch is successful. Callahan holds the ball to his forehead as he thanks his new Pokemon, before bringing him back out. The moment Sudowoodo emerges from the ball, the two embrace in a hug, cementing their determination to save their family. So caught up in their moment, they don't even realize that the smoke is closing in until a Gallade teleports right next to them, startling them. Before they can freak out over a sudden appearance or the smoke closing in around them, Gallade grabs both of them and teleports them to an area just outside of one of the city's emergency safe houses. Instead of going inside, however, Callahan simply thanks the Gallade for the help before asking if he knows who he needs to talk to find out what he needs to do to get rid of the smoke. Gallade tilts his head, clearly asking why he wants to know. Callahan's only answer is that his family needs him. It's all the answer he needs, as Gallade holds out his hand for the two to take before he's teleporting them again. While Oliver is in his office going over the countermeasures with his aides, and Harriet is opening the golden emerald box that had sat unopened in her living room for 50 years, Tauren is entering the Pokemon Research Center, his heart in his throat. He needs to do this. He knows he does, but that doesn't make it any easier. Ask his coworkers to help him when they already hate him? Ask them to risk their safety on the slim chance that they'll be able to save their city? He's quickly spotted by the director, who asks where he's been, before explaining that they've been given evacuation orders. Tauren's anxiety spikes. There's no way they'll help him now. They already have orders, and there's no way they'll drop those to help someone they don't even like. Before he can begin to truly spiral, he feels Chansey's hand on his back, offering him silent support. And he remembers. He remembers the way Ash stood up for him, even though they'd only just met. He remembers Risa thanking him for helping Pikachu after he was hurt. He remembers all of his Pokemon that have always stood by him, no matter what. He's not alone. He's never alone. They're supporting him. He can do this. Looking up at his colleagues, he tells them that he's not going. They all stare at him in shock until one of the older scientists tell him to stop talking nonsense and help them with the boxes. Bolstered by Chansey's hand on his back, Tauren shakily tells him no. He tells them that he knows they dislike him, that they think he's a failure, and that sometimes he can't get the words out, but he knows what he's doing. He knows that there's still a way to save their home, and he's going to try with or without them, because even if they don't believe in him, he has others that do, and he refuses to let them down when they're counting on him. The director approaches Tauren slowly as the Greenette catches his breath after his outburst. Calling his name to get his attention, the director tells him that he's sorry. He tells Tauren that he's always put others first, using his research for the sake of others. Even as his anxiety makes his life difficult, he never lets it impede his research. It's those things that make him respect Tauren so much as a researcher. He's sorry that he never made that clear. So what do you want us to do? He's soon joined by the other scientists, all offering their help and support. Tauren quickly wipes away a tear in the corner of his eye before he smiles at them and begins to tell them the plan. Fire. Humans carrying lit torches. They're talking about them, telling each other to keep their eyes peeled, to not let them escape. Everything is on fire. A figure is chasing them. They're engulfed in flames as everything around them burns. No. They're not on fire. This monster is fire. Zeraora's eyes spring open as a growl rumbles in their throat. Behind them, Ash, Risa, Margot, Ordino, and Ruby are laying some recently healed Pokemon down to rest. Noticing the movement from Zeraora, Margot gets to her feet, relieved to see her friend awake. In what she hopes is a soothing voice, she tells them that the bad men are gone now, that Officer Jenny came to collect them a few hours ago. Ash notices the tension in Zeraora's body and tells Margot to get back just in time as Zeraora surrounds himself in electrical energy before flickering to stand behind them. Ash holds up his hands to show them that he's not holding any weapons, while trying to tell them that they're not going to hurt them. Zeraora simply glares at them, their whole body tense and prepared for attack. Before a fight can break out, though, all of their attention is drawn to an explosion further into the forest. Looking towards the sound, they see a large pillar of smoke and fire rising up from the trees. Harriet wastes no time with pleasantries as she steps into Oliver's office, asking where Tauren is. Oliver tells her that he hasn't arrived yet, just as 3 new people suddenly appear in his office. Callahan turns to them, asking what he needs to do to get rid of the smoke. Blinking in surprise, Meowth asks Akio why he brought them here. The only response he gets is a grumbled, "He pulled the family card." Oliver begins to explain the plan, but before they can get too far, there's a loud explosion that shakes the building. Rushing outside, they quickly see the fire spreading on the mountain. Realizing that the fire is right near where the transformer is located, Harriet theorizes that the smoke must have caused some short circuit. At that moment, the entire city begins to go dark, the power cut by the short circuit and the fire. Team Rocket run as fast as they can away from the smoke towards the Pokemon Research Center, barely making it in time to pull themselves and their Lumberry cart into the building before the bulkheads are closed to block out the smoke. As they lie there, collapsed in relief, the power in the building suddenly goes out. In the lab at the back, Tauren gasps as the screen for the chemical extractor suddenly goes dark. The lights in the room quickly follow, and soon the only source of light is the soft glow of the half-finished natural cure. But even that is short-lived, as, without the power to keep it stable in its incomplete state, it soon fades and turns grey. Before he can even process this, Chansey calls him into the main room of the center, where she points out the window. Turning to look at where she's pointing, Tauren's heart sinks as he sees the bright red and orange glow of fire. And he'd thought everything was going wrong 2 days ago. Harriet shakes her head, turning to her companions. They can't wait for Tauren to get here. Besides, they'll need time to get the generator started anyway. Callahan nods in understanding before kneeling down to offer to carry her, stating that it'll be easier. Harriet asks if Akio can teleport them to the generator, but unfortunately, he's used up all of his uses of the move for now, so they're going to need to go on foot. Zeraora stares at the fire before their body is surrounded in electricity, drawing the attention of the humans. In a flash of blue lightning, Zeraora streaks across the sky and disappears into the orange glow of the fire. Margot realizes instantly what Zeraora is doing. They've gone to rescue the Pokemon that are, no doubt, caught in the fire. Eyes hardening with determination, she turns and begins to run in the direction that will take her to the fire. Seeing this, Risa calls out for her to wait, only for Ash to call out to Ordino and Ruby. Before he takes off after Margot, he turns to Risa. Looking her in the eyes, he tells her that he'll go after Margot, but she needs to get the Eternal Flame back where it belongs and call Lugia. Eyes widening, Risa asks why Ash can't just call back Espeon or Akio to do it. He shakes his head, pointing out that they're both in the middle of helping people get away from the smoke. The only one that can get the Eternal Flame back where it belongs in time to call Lugia is her. Before he leaves, he reaches into his backpack and pulls out a box. He hands it to her and tells her that he'd wanted to give it to her after the festival, but he thinks she'll need it more now. As soon as Risa has a hold on the box, he turns and runs after Margot, calling Ruby and Ordino to follow. Risa watches him go, calling after him that she can't do this. She can't run anymore. Her head snaps around as the familiar weight on her shoulder that is Pikachu suddenly vanishes. Looking to her side, she sees Pikachu running over to the Eternal Flame, limping slightly from his injured leg. Taking the end of the Eternal Flame in his teeth, he begins to pull it over to Risa. Even after losing his grip and rolling backwards, he goes right back to dragging it to her. Tears fill Risa's eyes as she watches Pikachu struggle against his injury to pull the Eternal Flame to her. Why? Why does he keep trying so hard? Finally, he manages to pull it the last few feet and pushes it towards Risa. Looking up at her with pride and determination, he smiles. Looking her in the eyes, he gives a loud, encouraging cry, and Risa remembers what Ash had said just the other day. A small smile graces her face as tears fall from her eyes. Sitting on her heels, she gives Pikachu a soft look as she pulls him into her arms. Thank you, Pikachu, for not giving up on me. Let's do this! Together. Turning back to the box, she opens it to find a pair of good quality running shoes. Giving a small laugh, she quickly pulls off her heels and puts the runners on, before using one of the scrunchies on her wrist to tie back her hair. Then, picking up the Eternal Flame and holding it under her arm, she gets into the start position that she remembers from her track days. With Pikachu holding onto his shoulder, she gives a final battle cry before taking off at a run. Tauren gulps down his anxiety. He has to think. He's got the knowledge, he knows he can think of something. He just has to think. Suddenly, his eyes catch on a cart full of lumberries and it clicks. Running up to the trio that clearly own the cart, he asks them if he can have all of the lumberries they have, as it might be the only thing that can save Fula City. The trio stare at him in shock for a few moments before nodding. Callahan runs as fast as he can as he carries Harriet on his back, the horde of Pokemon trailing behind them. They just need to get to the plant and get it running. Simple! They all come to a screeching halt as they find their way blocked by fire. Harriet tells them that they need to find another route. Meowth shakes his head. That could take hours and the people in Fula don't have that time. If they use their moves, they should be able to make a path through the fire. Before he can continue, Harriet cuts him off, saying that she won't allow them to do that. Sliding off of Callahan's back, she looks down at her gloved hand as memories flood her mind. Memories of the fire 50 years ago. The fire that had taken Snubbull, her only family, away from her. She should have held on to her, but she'd gone back for the key that makes the generator work. Harriet had held her hand out to grab her, but the fire had consumed Snubbull before she could reach her, and all that was left was the key. Harriet is brought back to the present by a paw on her arm. Meowth looks at her seriously. He tells her that he gets it. He looks away as he admits that he'd almost lost his kid not long ago, because Ash is Ash and would do anything to protect his loved ones. He turns back to Harriet. Losing those that you love never truly heals, but that doesn't mean that their loss is our fault, or that we're better off shutting everyone out. He nods towards the Pokemon standing around her. After all, family always has a way of finding you. A small smile spreads across Harriet's face as she pulls the key out of her pocket. Closing her eyes, she sends a silent thank you to Snubbull before getting back to her feet. Eyes alight with determined fire, she asks her new family to help her. With a cheer, they all turn back to the fire, determined to get through, even if they have to use brute force. Together, the Pokemon all begin combating the fire, with Arceus, Machamp, Heracross, Tyrogue, and Meowth removing the trees that the fire is using as a fuel source, Marill and Totodile using Water Gun to douse the flames, Xatu scouting from the air, and Sudowoodo using Copycat to help out wherever he can. Watching the others all work together, Togepi waves her arms excitedly. Spotting the light blue glow surrounding the baby's arms, Meowth tenses before shouting for everyone to take cover. They're all just able to get out of the way before Togepi's metronome activates and turns into Hydro Pump. The high-pressured blast of water not only puts out the fire, but also knocks down all of the trees in its way, leaving a clear path. While everyone stares at Togepi in absolute shock, Meowth simply picks her up while making sure to keep a hold of her arms so she doesn't do that a second time. And I thought I wouldn't need to worry about this again after Kooky evolved. Risa has no idea what to do. Every time she thinks she's about to make a straight shot for the tower, she's forced to change direction in order to avoid the smoke. She'll never get there if this keeps up. Her attention is drawn to her phone as it rings. Just who could be calling her at a time like this? Answering it, she's shocked to hear her little brother's voice on the other end. Rick tells her not to worry, he'll be her navigator. He's got a route that she can follow that'll keep her away from the smoke but still get her to the tower. Confused, she asks how Rick even knows where she is, only for Rick to tell her that this isn't the time. Deciding to let it go for now, Risa follows her brother's instructions, trusting him to not steer her wrong. After what feels like hours of running, Ash and Margot have finally found Zeraora in a large abandoned stadium with several other Pokemon. Calling out to Zeraora, Margot begins to run down the stairs before Ash can stop her. Running after her, he spots Zeraora preparing for an attack. Reacting fast, he calls for Ruby to shield everyone with Protect. Ruby does just that, blocking the attack before it reaches its targets. Once both moves have dissipated, she calls over to Zeraora, telling them that they're not here to fight. Refusing to listen, Zeraora launches another attack, forcing Ruby to grab the others and jump away. Once she lands, she turns back to Zeraora, preparing to fight to protect her family. Ash steps up next to her, reminding her of his policy. Never ask others to do what you wouldn't do yourself, especially if it's family. With that, the battle starts, though in actuality, the only one really attacking is Zeraora, while Ash and Ruby focus on dodging and using Protect to block attacks, while trying to talk sense into them. After a long and grueling process, it's finally done. Tauren picks up the capsule that now contains the concentrated lumberry essence with care. All of his and his colleagues' work has gone into this one chance to save their city. He gives the director a firm nod as he's told that the car to take him to the outskirts of the city has arrived. Oliver takes a deep breath as he begins to speak over the city's PA system, eternally grateful for Fula's emergency generators. Addressing his city, he tells them that a plan is being enacted to disperse the smoke. Then, steeling himself, he informs them that their city has been living a lie, one that he will be giving all the details of once the crisis is over. However, until then, he asks that, once the smoke is cleared, everyone pitches in to help combat the fire that has broken out on the mountain and aid the Pokemon living there. The generator has certainly seen better days. Everything is covered in plant life, and the number of holes littering the place makes Harriet worry about the place's structural integrity. As they reach the control room, she turns to Meowth, asking if he thinks his Dark Thunder move could help jumpstart the old thing. Meowth shakes his head. With all of the greenery covering the place, he's more likely to just start another fire. Nodding in understanding, she walks up to the control panel and inserts the key, causing the platform to rise as the roof opens. Once the platform comes to a stop, she messes with a few buttons and levers, causing the pillar in the center of the room to open into a turbine. Looking the turbine up and down, Meowth extends his claws before inserting them into the gaps between the metal. With surgical precision and delicacy, he digs out handfuls of green moss and other plants. After a few minutes, he jumps down, telling them that he can't get all of the gunk out, but that should make turning it a little easier. With that, everyone gets into groups of 2 or 3 and begins to push the turbine. As the turbine turns, the propellers lower to point towards the city, as the debris from the building falls like green snow. Now, all they need to do is wait for Tauren. Zeraora has got to be one of the most stubborn individuals that Ash has ever met, and he was co-parented by Meowth. He quickly dodges to the side as another attack is launched, bringing him next to Ruby. Turning to her, he asks if she has any more protects left. Ruby nods but refuses to tell him how many. They turn back to Zeraora, who's clutching their shoulder as they wince in pain. Even without Ash or Ruby attacking back, the strain of the continuous attacks are clearly taking a toll on them. Seeing this, Margot begs Zeraora to stop, to listen to them. Ash turns to face them fully, his eyes full of determination. He knows that humans have hurt them. He understands why they don't want to trust humans again. But living in constant fear and anger is no way to live. Take it from someone who was raised by someone who has every reason to hate humans. Ash knows there are humans that don't deserve trust. But there are others like Margot, who will keep that trust close to their hearts and never let it go. That will return that trust with loyalty. But Zeraora will never find those humans if they just shut everyone out. Hasn't Margot proven that she deserves to be trusted? Zeraora looks to Margot, who's looking at them with worry, before turning back to Ash and Ruby. For a moment, it seems like Zeraora is finally going to listen to them. But then, they shake their head and launch another plasma fist. However, with the pain of their injuries breaking their concentration, the blue lightning veers away from a group and towards the group of rescued Pokemon. Acting on pure instinct, Ash throws himself between the Pokemon and the attack, his arms spread wide as he shields them from attack. Before it can meet its mark, however, Ruby jumps in front of him, raising a Protect. The bright green shield activates just in time, shielding them from the attack. As the shield falls, Ruby collapses to one knee, causing Ash to gasp in fear as he rushes to her. Kneeling next to her, he asks if she's okay. Ruby nods to Ash, while waving off an equally worried Ordino, telling them that she's fine, but that was her last Protect. Ash smiles in relief before his attention is drawn to a figure who's standing right next to them. Zeraora looks down at them, before holding out a hand to Ash and Ruby in a clear invitation to help them up. Smiling, they each take an offered hand, allowing Zeraora to help them to their feet. Torin gasps for breath as he finally reaches the control room of the generator. Running up all of those stairs had not been a good idea. Holding up the capsule, he tells everyone that he's got the cure before he recognizes Callahan. Surprised, he asks what he's doing here, to which the older man tells him that he got the generator moving. Meowth rolls his eyes. Phrasing, old man. You make it sound like you did all the work by yourself when you say it like that. Torin shakes his head before getting back on track, telling them that they need to get the cure onto the propellers. Callahan tells him to leave that to him. He can throw it. Torin's eyes widen as he stares at Callahan like he's grown a second head. He asks why they don't just use a ladder, only to be told by Harriet that all of the ladders burnt to ash 50 years ago. Harriet turns to the Pokemon, telling them to get ready to turn the turbines again, while Torin turns to Callahan. He tells him that all of his colleagues put everything they have into making this. It's the only one they have, so they've only got one shot. Callahan nods in understanding before taking the capsule and heading for the stairs with Sudowoodo. As Callahan and Sudowoodo reach the roof, the propellers are already turning, causing more debris to fall and forcing Callahan to shield the capsule with his vest. Frowning, he wonders aloud just how they're going to pull this off. With all of the debris, the ball will break before it even reaches the propellers. Sudowoodo turns to Callahan, pointing to himself with a few determined cries. Callahan asks if he's got an idea, earning a nod in response. Nodding back, Callahan prepares to throw the capsule, while Sudowoodo prepares Stone Edge. I trust you, partner! With that shout, he throws the capsule while Sudowoodo sends Stone Edge after it. The sharp rock fragments shield the capsule from the debris, allowing it to reach the propellers, where it promptly shatters, covering the mechanism with the Lumberry essence inside. While Callahan and Sudowoodo jump in celebration, everyone in the control room pushes the turbine even harder, speeding up the propeller's rotation and spreading the Lumberry essence all throughout the city. As the essence spreads, it neutralizes the smoke, causing it to dissipate. All through the city and the forest, everyone watches in wonder as the bright green flecks drift through the air. Some celebrate while others prepare for the next task that's before them. And, in Risa's case, she takes strength in the knowledge that the others have managed to take care of their end to push herself just a little bit harder. They've done their part, now she needs to finish hers. As Callahan and Sudowoodo return to the control room, everyone takes a moment to cheer before Harriet reminds them that the trouble isn't over yet. Everyone nods in understanding before Meowth turns to Torin, asking if he's got any ethers on him. Blinking in surprise, he reaches into his pocket before pulling one out, telling Meowth that he never leaves home without at least one. Meowth nods before asking if Akio can use it, explaining that he's all out of teleports and one of those could come in real handy right now. Zeraora cuts down a line of trees while Ash and Margot throw buckets of water onto the fire. It's not even making a dent in the blaze, but at least it's keeping it from spreading and overtaking them. At Margot's worried expression, Ash tells her not to worry. They just need to hold out until help arrives. At that moment, a flock of Pidgey fly overhead, carrying buckets of water which they pour on the fire. Turning to the direction that the bird Pokemon had come from, they see a massive dark form coming towards them through the smoke. Only, once it gets closer, they see it's not a single large mass, but a large group of people and Pokemon. Leading them is Oliver, giving orders to the group and assigning tasks. When he looks up, his eyes meet his daughter's and he's about to run to her when Zeraora drops down to the ground between them, glaring and growling at the group of strangers. Walking up to Zeraora, Margot places a gentle hand on their arm. Looking up at them gently, she tells them it's okay. This time, everyone is here to protect the forest. Zeraora turns back to the group, no longer growling but still tense. There's a few moments of silence, then Oliver bows deeply to Zeraora before turning back to direct everyone on what to do to handle the fire. Ash smiles before his attention is drawn to the call of his name behind him. Turning around, he sees the group that had gone to the generator running up to him. Ash smiles brightly, relieved to see that everyone is okay as the rest of his family joins them. Harriet tells them that the situation is bad, but if they can get the sprinkler system to work, that should go a long way to cutting down the workload. Torin says that he'll go to ask the electric Pokemon to help out. Meowth goes with him, calling over his shoulder to Ash to be careful. Watching all of this, Margot turns back to Zeraora. Softly, she tells her friend to listen. As they watch the humans and Pokemon work together to put out the fire and pull the Pokemon caught in the blaze to safety, Margot tells them that Ash was right. There are bad people out there, like those poachers, and everyone makes bad decisions sometimes, but not everyone is like that. Ash told her something not long ago, that people can be pretty weak on their own, but when they work together, they can become stronger than anything else in the world. She looks up at Zeraora with a smile and tells him that if Pokemon felt the same way about humans, well, she thinks it would be nice. Turning from her, Zeraora doesn't respond. However, they do move towards the group in the thick of the fire, determined to lend them their aid. While Zeraora works to protect those helping to protect their forest, others are doing what they can to help out too. Be it the Pokemon with electric-type moves helping to power the sprinkler system, or the psychic Pokemon moving debris out of the way, or the water types working to douse the fire, or the fire types using their resistance to fire to rescue the injured and trapped Pokemon, or the healer Pokemon tending to the injured. Finally, the sprinklers come to life, filling the stadium with artificial rain and dousing the flames inside, giving them a safe area until the fire outside can be put out. Smiling brightly, Margot rushes to Ash, calling out to him as she waves. Before she can reach him, however, there's an almighty boom as the base of one of the stadium's aerial towers explodes from the heat. The great mass of metal topples over, heading straight for Margot. Ash runs forward, hoping to push her out of the way of the tower, while Oliver, also seeing the danger, runs forward, shouting his daughter's name. Margot closes her eyes as she waits for the crushing pain, only for a pair of arms to wrap around her protectively and the familiar sound of Zeraora's electricity to reach her ears. Eyes snapping open, she looks up to see Ash pulling away from her as he too turns to look above them. There, surrounded in blue electricity, floating above the ground and holding the tower, is Zeraora. Risa is gasping for breath when she finally reaches the Eternal Flame Tower. She pauses for a few moments as she looks up at the tower, only just realizing that she's now going to have to climb up there to put the Eternal Flame back. Taking a deep breath, she pushes on. Everyone watches with wide eyes as Zeraora begins to somehow lift the broken aerial tower higher and higher. One by one, everyone begins to cheer them on, telling them to stay strong. Hearing their cries of encouragement, Zeraora remembers Margot's words. The power that comes from others relying on each other. They quite like the sound of that. With Margot's shout of encouragement ringing in their ears, they finally manage to lift the tower the last few feet and place it on the roof, where it can't hurt anyone. Exhausted from the task, Zeraora begins to fall. Acting fast, several Pokemon use Cotton Spore to create a soft mass of cotton to break their fall. As they land in the cotton pile with a loud thwomp, Margot runs to them as Ash and Oliver trail behind her. The cotton dissipates just as they reach the unconscious Pokemon. Margot falls to her knees next to them, begging them to wake up. As if in response to her request, Zeraora opens their eyes and looks over at the crying girl. Margot buries her face in Zeraora's chest, crying with relief as Zeraora gives a deep, rumbling purr. Finally, Risa reaches the pedestal of the Eternal Flame. Now she just needs to put the darn thing in it. Placing the Eternal Flame in the hole where it's meant to rest, she tries to push it back into place. But the stupid thing is so hard to get in. Seeing his friend struggling, Pikachu jumps onto her head and helps to push. With that little extra force, the Eternal Flame clicks into place, sending up a beam of aquamarine light as Risa is blown back slightly from the sun pulse of energy. As the beam rises into the sky, the sun begins to rise over the horizon. Picking herself up from where she'd landed, Risa looks up to see Lugia before her. Getting to her feet, she asks Lugia to make the rain fall, explaining the situation with the fire. Lugia nods to her before they fly up and over to the location of the fire, bringing the rain with them. In the stadium, everyone watches in awe as Lugia flies overhead and the rain comes down in a gentle but steady torrent. With their task done, Lugia turns and flies back to the ocean. As they do, the wind that is Fula's lifeblood returns in full force. The danger is finally over. That night, the final night of the festival, everyone gathers around the Pokemon Research Center to take part in the Lantern Parade, where everyone releases paper lanterns to float through the city in a parade of lights. Standing at the top of the steps leading to the research center, Oliver thanks everyone for all of their efforts in allowing this to happen at all. He tells the crowd the words that Ash had told him, that as long as you have those that care about you, there's nothing that you can't accomplish. The events of the last few days have shown him that this is true. And so, in spirit of that truth, he revokes the lie about Zeraora's disappearance and declares that Fula will now live alongside Zeraora and the Pokemon of the forest in peace. A great cheer echoes through the crowd as they release their lanterns. In the forest, on top of a cliff, Zeraora looks out over Fula City as a stream of golden lights rise up into the sky, a small smile on their face. Rick smiles as he records his newest episode for the Pokemon channel, informing his audience of how the mountain of Fula City has been made into a nature preserve. He's cut off when the door to his room is suddenly thrown open with a bang. Looking over, he's faced with a very angry sister. He hastily pulls off his costume as she marches up to him, her sunglasses held in her hand. Channeling some of the terrifying rage she'd seen in Ash, she glares at Rick, while Pikachu does the same, demanding to know just how he knew where she was. Rick gulps. There's no way he's getting out of this one. Meanwhile, Ash and Meowth are walking down the path away from Fula City after sending the rest of their family home to rest. So, on to the next stop? You bet! After seeing Risa get back her passion for running, seeing Margot working so hard to get the preserve running, I'm more pumped to find my own aspiration than ever! And that, everyone, is where I'll leave the story. For now, anyway. I hope you enjoyed this anniversary special as much as last year's. I'm Rune. See you in the next story.
You come, join the song.